Kyoraku Shunsui is one of the most enigmatic characters throughout all of Bleach, but one of the most impressive things about him is that while a lot of his presence in the story seems to be pure fun and flair, everything about it feeds into his core characterization and role. And that role is one that informs us of the tragedy that is his character while capturing the main themes of Bleach as a whole. Shunsui swings from one extreme to another, from slapstick to deep devilish darkness, and somehow this variability all fits into one cohesive character arc that is as profound and all-encompassing as it is deeply striking. Shunsui is arguably the most relatable character in Bleach to me for reasons that I'll touch on later, but even aside from that, I personally think that his descent and ascent and tragedy and celebration, how his relationship with death progresses and evolves, it all makes him one of the most important and defining characters in the story. Early on, Shunsui is characterized by his unique charisma and flamboyance. He's silly, charming, flirty, and funny. He drinks, he's, notably often in a self-inflicted way, the butt of jokes, and he just seems to have an air about him that tries to force a lightheartedness. But what is notable is that often, those carrying an immense burden unwilling to share that burden with others play up an easygoing front. It's not as if this is a false mask of Shunsui at all, but it is an aspect that he exaggerates in order to hide the truth of what he's feeling deep inside and further isolate himself. But despite this facade, there is a hint to the truer nature of his character during the Soul Society arc. Something I made note of here and there in the midst of and in reaction to the prospect of Rukia's unjust execution is that in uncommon yet occasional moments, Shunsui can be seen wearing a sentimental smile. And this at first feels jarring simply because his introductory material doesn't seem to hint at this sort of emotion and sentimentality, but the closer you look at these smiles, the more they seem genuinely sad. Shunsui is very clear and honest about the fact that he detests fighting, bloodshed, and war, and as a result, partly in order to avoid such things, he found himself compliant and a contributor to maintaining the stagnant status quo that the Soul Society defended. He often sat back, with an artificiated air of laziness, protecting a peace that subjugates. But throughout it all, he seems profoundly sad at the state of the world, and he isn't at all happy with things. He does whatever he can to avoid fighting and pain, but the method of doing so is filled with ramifications that pain him as well. He wears a roguish, silly smile, but the smile most indicative of his internal state is the one defined by sadness and resignation. Even though this isn't directly addressed, Shunsui is burdened from the very start despite his contrasting presence. And through information presented to us early on, we can see that the core reason for this took place early in Shunsui's life, as tends to be the case with a lot of trauma. To put it simply, Shunsui as he is in the story is the result of a large amount of accumulating stress. Despite outright stating that he's uncomfortable with having a large amount of responsibility when faced with death, particularly with loved ones leaving him, Shunsui sees no other way to honor them than to take on their wills and legacies. Not in a productive, positive way, but in a way that pressures him and makes him feel like if he fails them, he will be a sad excuse of a person not fit to have been entrusted with their wills. His brother Shunzin dies, leaving him with sadness and burdens and his most precious possession, a hairpin from his wife Isuzu. And Isuzu then entrusts Shunsui with the Zanpakuto of the Issei family in fear of the curse that it supposedly held in order to prevent it from affecting her daughter Nanao, who Shunsui begins looking after Isuzu's death. From a young age, Shunsui was the victim of constant, accumulating stress and burdens put onto him by those who pass, and while that was never their intent, the weight of these burdens slowly but surely increases the more time goes by. Shunsui is the quintessential friend to lean on, to tell all of your problems to ask a favor from, and he will always accept all of that willingly because he is compassionate and kind. But as a result of this, he has become someone that everyone leans on and entrusts things to, but that never, ever leans on others. He never opens up, he never shows weakness or vulnerability, because how else can he be strong enough to continue carrying forward all of these burdens? He constantly takes on responsibilities despite hating it because it feels like a way to maintain a connection to those who pass, a demonstration and expression of his love in the face of the hulking, destructive, and sad shadow of death. But he becomes more and more weathered and starts losing himself bit by bit as he becomes enveloped in physical and psychological layers that draw him more and more inward. And his aversion to death and conflict leads to him seeking any way to avoid it, even if it means being complicit with things that he opposes, which only adds to this. In the Arrancar saga, Shunsui outright states that he would much rather pretend to fight Stark than actually fight him, but that this situation dictates that it's just not possible for him at this point due to the stakes of the current battle. He is often very honorable and principled about conflict, but despite having his own self-imposed rules within it, such as not involving innocents or children, overall being quite cordial and respectful during combat, etc., he still very much despises the need for it. And in one of his most important lines, he stresses in a somewhat hypocritical way that despite his own ideas about principles in combat, they ultimately mean nothing, and the moment a war is started, both sides are evil. There is no justice in it, and resorting to violence in any way regardless of one's cause is the root of a lot of the problems in the world. It all lends more insight into how much he hates the state of the world, and whether or not he confronts this fact consciously, how much he hates the byproducts of the oppressive status quo that he ensures. And his Shikai special ability is incredibly indicative too, as it is essentially a method of turning children's games into reality. In that way, it reflects his outer layer's more playful tone, but it also reveals much of Shunsui's inner darkness and feelings of resignation and helplessness, as anyone caught within the range of its Reiatsu, including Shunsui himself, must play by the rules set out by Katen Kyokotsu. Shunsui is the catalyst for this, but once it begins, he is ultimately powerless and must play by the established rules, just as one can argue that he does in life. The power is charming and playful on the surface, but lurking within is a core of darkness, just as is the case with Shunsui. Ultimately, his lack of agency here and his role in his own power is telling. He is playing at being more lax than he is, and he will do anything to avoid a fight, but once things get serious, despite his outward charm, he is unable to prevent himself from carrying on his duty. And that duty suffocates him. After he loses a father figure in Yamamoto, Shunsui obviously experiences immense grief, but after then being given the title of Captain General in Yamamoto's place, he simply bears it. Another loved one lost, another will to take on. It's nothing new. This is the one that has the biggest impact on him. But what's one more will to add to his burden? He's already drowning, so what does it matter if he sinks a bit deeper? Yet in spite of all of this, Shunsui takes the title with determination to steer the Soul Society properly and progress it using methods that Yamamoto could not, in large part in the memory and honor of Yamamoto. In this vein, Shunsui resorts to using Aizen for instance, and for the sake of fighting back against Yuhabaha through empowering Kenpachi, Shunsui enables what ends up being the death of Unohana. His dear friend and partner Ukitake finds himself lending his power to the cause in honor of Yamamoto as well, and ends up sacrificing himself for the sake of the Soul Society too. But again, it's nothing new. Just more burdens to add to his already leaden shoulders. In his fight with Leal, Shunsui finds himself using his last resort, his Bankai. Katen Kyokotsu Karamatsu Shinju is a natural evolution of the children's game into a theatrical representation reminiscent of Rakugo, a production for which Shunsui once again has no choice but to devilishly buy into and reinforce. Whereas the children's game was representative of Shunsui's own playfulness and as a result symbolized his facade, here the front is gone and the symbolism is much more raw with the evolution into this Bankai. This is the deepest essence of Shunsui, making the world appear dark and lonely, hopeless, the way it feels to him in his most agonizing moments, subjecting both combatants to pain and an abyss, this being representative of his own mentality, concluding with what could seem like a merciful beheading. Shunsui is subject to it all. This pain, war, this world, his burdens, death, severed connections. It all weighs so heavy on him. Every day is a struggle and it weakens him from the inside out. Despite the initial carefree demeanor, there are few that feel as much internal anguish as Shunsui throughout the story. So much so that on the brink of death, his personified Bankai, again a projection of his deepest will, Ohana, implores him to run away, to rest and let go of his duty, to get some sleep and be carried away. And this shows that despite his fervent desire to carry out these tasks for those that he loves, his determination to fulfill these burdens, despite all of this, he yearns for a reprieve. He wants to rest. And he conceptualizes that as death. Shunsui is not at all the aloof, easygoing man that he is often portrayed and celebrated as, and in actuality, there are few that feel and are hurt as profoundly as him. Ironically, due to his repulsion of death leading to these struggles, Shunsui finds himself wanting to be wrapped in its skeletal embrace. But while Ohana voices his deeply rooted desires here, there is another projection in the story of Shunsui's own will and spirit. An external one that is in some ways more accurate and loyal to who Shunsui is. In this moment, Nanao abruptly awakens him from his stupor and shows Shunsui that there is much more to him than how he perceives himself. She tells him to release her Bankai. She says not to worry so much about protecting her from the curse in such a stifling way. Shunsui took on a burden for her, but he never thought to give her agency to make the decision for herself. And Nanao in this moment opens herself up to it and chooses not to believe in that curse. It's genuinely incredible what such a small change does for Shunsui. His shoulders bear such a heavy burden. He's weighed down like no one else. But she alleviates that just a little by forcing herself into his world and telling him that she can bear some of the weight, and it makes all the difference. Nanao's support and what she tells Shunsui is such a true-to-life depiction of the fact that we are our own worst enemy sometimes when it comes to our perception of ourselves. We can be cruel to ourselves, and in our most vulnerable moments, we can easily miss the good in favor of chastising our flaws. So in some ways, our view of ourselves is often skewed. And that's why sometimes all it takes is one person you care for to offer their perspective, to show you the you that they see, and to save you. And in this case, this involves allowing Shunsui to save Nanao. Not in a way that increases his burden, but through a method of openness and honesty, through fighting together as opposed to constantly isolating himself. Which is not so coincidentally a trait of his Bankai, as its active field is so large that he feels that he must do it away from anyone he cares about. Shunsui just takes on so much responsibility, constantly at his own expense. But the moment he leans on someone, the moment he's able to rely on a heart that he formed, the world opens up. As is the case with so many throughout the story. Ichigo, Rukia, Aizen, Renji, Uryu, the list goes on. Through Nanao shouldering her own curse and showing courage in the face of darkness in the way that she learned from him, Shunsui is inspired. And as she allows him to protect her, as she shares the burden with him, it's all he needs to be fulfilled. Just one person, just one alternate perspective to share with, can make the world that much brighter and can make the ugliness of reality that much more bearable. This story is filled to the brim with lonely people clouded by layers of psychological barriers, grief, pain, and trauma of immense depth and complexity. Ichigo, Kenpachi, Orihime, Rukia, Byakuya, Aizen in his own way, Yugrum, Yuha, Stark, Ulquiorra, Neutra, Grimjo, and many more. In all honesty, it's harder to find characters without these burdens than with them. But even in spite of that, Shunsui's hits in such an incredible way because of the slow unraveling of his external demeanor and how visceral the depths of his darkness are. And on a personal level, I can relate to this. I don't tend to value relatability in stories as much as I used to, but I see myself so much in Shunsui. In so many facets of life, I'm too hard on myself. I often don't see a lot of my good sides. I take on too much. I don't ask for help. I don't show vulnerability, and it builds and builds until I find myself suffocating. But Shunsui fighting through this shows that leaning on others, using bonds and heart to help see value in yourself and joy in the world and to strive forward in spite of fear, it's all incredibly necessary. Shunsui's journey and Nanao's role in it strike so deeply for me and encourage me to be kinder to myself, to take care of myself. And from then on, the world won't be easy, but it'll become a lot simpler. In the penultimate chapter of the series, we open appropriately with Shunsui. He reflects on the rebuild process, on his job as Captain General, and on how admirable his mentor was, before bidding goodbye to Ukitake's grave. And this shows a total and complete contrast with the way that he used to view loved ones, loss, grief, and death. Whereas before, Shunsui would be totally burdened and suffocated by the pressure and anxieties associated with carrying on the wills of those he loves, now he can wear an easy, genuine smile while thinking of them. He doesn't feel weighed down by the torch that they passed on and the legacy that they left, and he can instead remember them for the positive impact that they had on his life and how much he loved them, hopeful that wherever they are, they're taking a well-deserved rest. And he can feel the same with Unohana, his brother, and Isuzu. He begins to view death not with dread, but with celebration of a sort. He obviously still feels sadness and grieves, but he is able to progress forward and take solace in the memories of those who pass rather than be held back and stagnant as a result of them. Bleach concludes with a distinct focus on death and how it unites us all, how fear of it is inevitable as expressed by Yuhabaha, but how we must not allow that fear to stop us in our tracks and how we cannot run away from reality, as expressed by Aizen. And that is what Shunsui learns to do, to share the burden of his grief with those he loves, and take on life with bravery instead of shrinking and isolating in fear. And through doing this, he can smile with proper honesty, living his own way, and he can use all of these experiences to walk forward with courage and be the Shunsui that his loved ones had such pride in. Not avoiding, not withdrawing, without burdens and with an expressed joy at his departed family and how wonderful the times they had together were. Striving forwards with a weight off his shoulders to allow him to take steps towards a brighter future and a courageous world. Many thanks for watching.